All right, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Visibility at Scale, Top Work from Anywhere IT Headaches Resolved. All right, before we get started and while folks are joining up, I have a couple housekeeping notes about Zoom for this webinar. First, you can change your audio settings from the audio settings menu. If you have trouble with the audio, you can switch between computer audio and phone call to get dial-in number. Under the Q&A section to ask us questions, or if you'd like more detail on the topic, we've got a few others here that can answer your questions directly by chat throughout the webinar. And we will also take some questions live at the end. All right, with that out of the way, let's get things started. To set the stage, here's what our experts are going to cover today. Scaling for the future, anatomy of a remote work connection, working smarter, not harder, before rounding things out with a live Q&A. Leading us today are Alec Pinkham and Joseph Oakes. Alec Pinkham is a director of product marketing at AppNeta. He's been in the network space for 60 years and in the enterprise software space for 10. He brings a background in engineering, quality assurance, and product management to marketing, working closely with product and customer-facing teams to understand the needs and requirements of enterprise IT. Joseph Oakes is a technical account manager for AppNeta. With 8 years of experience in pre-seed and post-sales technical roles, Joe has been a successful part of various teams, building value for customers that align businesses and technology needs with various critical product offerings. Joe has a background in sales and sales engineering, network and SaaS technologies, with degrees in organizational leadership, accounting, and finance from Southern New Hampshire University. All right, with that out of the way, let's pass things over to Alec to kick things off.
Great, thanks, Paul. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about kind of what we mean by scale here. So over the past year, many of our customers and many of you have seen 100 or 1,000-fold increases on the number of quote unquote offices that IT has to support, with employees now at home connected to offices and cloud infrastructure. So getting a handle on that home performance for employees comes with a pre-existing trend around an increase in the total amount of data that IT has to process, as well as an increase in the number of sources of data that IT needs to aggregate in order to kind of make sense of network performance. And based on conversations we've had with customers around planning for the future and our own study with network teams, there is an understanding building in the enterprise that work will never be the same, right? Meaning that it will be far more distributed. Employees can and will be working from anywhere, from the office one day, home the next, hotel when business travel resumes, and IT will be expected to support them regardless of that location. So we've already seen some of the largest companies planning for this kind of flexible environment, Google and other tech giants considering 3-day in-office work weeks with a percentage of people permanently working remote. From a Gartner study, just over 50% of respondents wanted a flexible weekly schedule, where in our study and one done by Microsoft, over 80% wanted one. So notably, on all of those, under 20% for all of the studies said that they'd want to return to a full in-office schedule, right? And a lot of this is on the back of employees and many businesses feeling successful in this remote environment, which is a huge shift for a lot of enterprises. And this is even in the face of a pandemic. So employees want that flexibility, businesses want the continuity, and IT is kind of stuck in the middle when it comes to this future of working from anywhere. So if you're nodding your head here, you're not alone. But I want to be clear. When AppNeta talks about work from anywhere, we are including the office in this definition. It's not just a work from home future, but a combination of office, cloud, and home environments that IT is supporting and will have to support into the future. So when we address work from anywhere, we're accounting for the fluid schedules of employees, and we're focusing on the visibility required for IT to solve issues when they don't necessarily know where an employee is on any given day. And that's the core issue we're starting to hear, is that IT is looking forward and finding it challenging to identify what they need for tooling, and more specifically, what they need for visibility to address a workforce outside of traditional enterprise networks and schedules. So to go a bit deeper on this thread of visibility, we've tasked Joe to explore this. Joe?
Thanks, Alec. So one of the main changes that comes with the shift to work from anywhere is the addition of new uncontrollable and non-static environmental variables, which are added to the existing environment as what we'll call additional error domains. So based on the diagram, you can see that we've extended the remote connection in two key areas. The first is the end user's home network, which comprises of the residential ISP. And the second is the addition of this VPN tunnel as well, adding on top of the corporate network. Now, keep in mind that this is in addition to the existing environment that we're already supporting, but adding the challenges that come along with trying to support an environment that isn't commercial grade and doesn't have the same capabilities as something that you'd find in a traditional corporate setting. And so this shift is one that's really important to note. To Alex's point, the key is to get visibility into these environments, as well as keeping visibility from the existing corporate and office infrastructure monitoring and visibility. It also adds to the idea that it's more important than ever to be able to dissect the different error domains that could be responsible for the user's poor experience. Instead of things being specifically in a network that we can control, there's an element now outside of our control, namely the residential ISP and the VPN tunnel environments. Now, one of the other major challenges is that there's had to be a shift in dynamic related to how users understand the environments they're using. In the past, we could probably bucket users, or I should say employees, into one of two buckets: technically savvy. Those would be your traditional network engineers, your IT staff, your operations teams, things of that nature, and your non-technical staff, everybody else. And to those non-technical individuals, the idea was they didn't really understand beyond wireless versus wired how the network works. They open their browser in the morning, whatever browser that they choose, and it just worked. It connected them to the internet, but they didn't really understand what happened in the background to make that connection work. What we've seen is that there's been a shift where even the non-technical side of our typical employee bases are starting to become more savvy with basic networking understanding. It no longer just works. They understand that there are tools like VPNs that are necessary, and they understand that there's a difference between the network environment that they connected to at the office as opposed to the one that they're connecting to at home. And what this has led to is a change to the idea that these environments are kind of obfuscated from the problem, almost to the point of invisibility. Whereas in the past, users really didn't question whether the issue was with the VPN or the internet. They were, just concerned, hey, I can't get connected to this thing. Today, what we're seeing is a much larger focus on how the end user understands their environment to be able to assist IT in troubleshooting. And so being aware of these various components means that there's a shift on the IT side to not be so hyper-focused on the user's residential ISP or the home network as the root cause of the problem. Now, this has required adoption of new technologies like AppNetto deployed in a new way, namely directly on user workstations rather than just at the offices, in order to enable IT the full visibility into the breadth of the supporting domains, such as the ISP, the VPN, or VDI environments. Now, the addition of the new error domains, along with the persistence of the existing and still relevant infrastructure, drives home the importance of being able to accurately, continuously, and completely monitor the work from anywhere environment. When we were discussing the work from office environment, there were multiple tool sets that could provide visibility across a variety of different architecture areas. Think NetFlow, SNMP, interface level statistics. And for the most part, there was no concern around the network's ability to deliver. We would purchase a business grade ISP with certain SLAs, and everything was good. And so IT was able to focus more heavily on the end user experience. Even when users periodically worked from home before the pandemic, IT had a different perspective about how to manage and support them, mainly to blame the home network or the ISP for most of the issues. And for a long time, this worked. There wasn't anything wrong with it because it was accurate to some extent. However, due to the pandemic, we've seen that perspective and the associated expectations drastically shift. It's now imperative that the IT team have insight into both the end user experience, as well as needing to have more capacity to identify the network's ability to deliver. This means IT needs to understand whether each household has the underlying bandwidth and structure, architecture, to support multiple users, whether it's telecommuting adults or children operating under remote education, or very young children watching Netflix all day. And the requirements of the day-to-day reality is that video conferencing and VPN usage and remote access resources are going to take place from non-commercial networks moving forward. And so having that visibility is really important. While expectations have increased, the availability of tooling that can provide the data to meet them has been reduced, as has IT's ability to solve problems directly. Gone are the days when IT could call the carrier and say, we're paying for X, you're giving us Y. So many businesses are now forced to understand the home environment, or the home office environment rather, in a manner that's more synonymous with the corporate IT space. Instead of having some unknown entity that's providing the user's network, a lot of businesses are now asking their employees, who is your carrier? Who is your provider? What are you paying for? And being able to factor that in when we talk about things like identifying transit quality. Is the user on a satellite or microwave connection versus a DSL, fiber, or broadband connection when we think of things like stability and performance. Additionally, IT is being tasked with having historical data to trend and analyze across a larger number of both aero domains and physical workspaces. We're not dealing with 5 offices, we're dealing with 500 employees globally distributed across multiple network spaces, multiple states in some cases, and in other cases, multiple countries. So while the goalposts haven't moved, the field just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Joe. And I'm in total agreement on that smarter user front, because at the end of the day, it is all going to tie back to end user experience. And, Joe talked about the error domains that we need to be looking at, and there are going to be multiple inputs to help IT understand these. But ensuring that users are able to connect to business critical apps is what's important here. So IT has to organize and collect these multiple sources of truth in order to be able to troubleshoot issues in today's architectures. So I want to look at a few tactics that AppNet can help with here. And these are things that you can also get from a vast kind of wide array of tools. But let's attack one of the most common headaches for network engineers, right? Isolating problems that are happening now, but where you need an understanding of where issues are occurring across multiple locations. So a map view like this one can provide a quick regional check to see if issues might be widespread. This example is a bit high level, but showing the performance of AWS regions connected to, in this case, a Denver office. This can quickly show that general east to west traffic is performing well, indicated in the green, where colors are linked to a threshold-based alert profile. And the Denver link is showing red, representing a few jitter violations to this AWS target. Here we're starting with the office locations with known network capacity, known devices, and some previous testing, so that you can create a baseline comparison for apps that are also accessed from the home in a same area. So once you're kind of beyond the step and narrowed the scope from app to network issue, the big question is going to be where, right? We talked about the error domains, but with many employees working from home in these locations, at least for the short term, that are close to office environments, understanding the regional performance of the business critical apps can provide a proxy for end user experience to alert you when issues are wider spread than a single person. And once you have that basic regional insight, we can broaden this to other use cases, right? SaaS apps are generally distributed across geographies to provide lowest possible latency so that users have better performance. But internal apps that are hosted in specific regions, specific cloud providers, VPN platforms, or VDI deployments with centralized hubs, they can all benefit greatly from this regional insight to help IT teams quickly identify problems that are affecting multiple people. And when we go to a managerial perspective, this other dashboard is around the network violations that are occurring over a period of time. And while the map views are helpful, sometimes, especially in this one-to-one world, we need to gauge how the teams can have the most impact by focusing on the worst performing locations, apps, or even users. So by identifying hotspots, you can focus your attention easier. So what are we looking at here? In this example, we've started with a regional tag for the East Coast US. We can drill in further to a specific business function, in this case, a call center, and see performance of our sales and marketing cloud environment in Azure. right? We could just as easily drill into the east to west cloud to cloud function, depending on what other sources of data and what AppNeta are reporting. But the size of these boxes here, one thing to note is that they indicate the number of network paths that have been violated. So the number of kind of application delivery paths from application to user, application to location. We can assess how widespread an issue is with this same tagging and filtering and kind of drill down capability. So now we have kind of two different views. We have the map view and we have this violation view. So what this is really doing is allowing teams to speed up the triage of both regional issues by using information that we have here for the actual location, as well as automatically generated ISP tagging. We can also look up app-specific problems or even user-specific issues to reduce that all-important mean time to resolution stat, right? Now that we're dealing with the one-to-one problems, as I alluded to, with employees working from home, instead of that one-to-many world where fixing issues in an office location actually affects a number of people, IT teams need to be more efficient in this one-to-one world. And in order to be kind of a bit better servant to the business and focus on strategic initiatives by getting some of the troubleshooting out of the way. So what we're looking for, or what we're looking at here, is a new form of visibility that's flexible enough to offer the insight into this constantly shifting mix of office, cloud, and home environments. So with this, our customers have agreed that there's a need for this visibility going forward. And what it's leading to is a new arena around SLAs. You know, specifically, there are business SLAs around critical apps, as well as the office or home environments where employees are connecting from. And whether or not the apps meet SLAs for performance while users are at home, or whether these home environments can support good performance, will pretty quickly become issues the business needs to proactively identify. And so beyond end user experience, there's also this thread to consider of whether or not apps that you're using are able to serve a more decentralized employee base going forward. And so from the business perspective, there's a lot to think about here. There's another dimension that we should consider. Joe, do you want to tackle metrics?
Absolutely, happy to. So when we talk about metrics in the context of work from anywhere SLAs, there's certainly been a shift from more traditional metrics like response time to support tickets, uptime of business services, or even quality and consistency of carrier connections, to things that are more focused on that work from anywhere environment, VPN connectivity issues, impact of last mile to productive hours, and per user performance metrics, while all at the same time giving IT less tools to hold someone accountable when these metrics are violated. And so what this has done is it's forced businesses to rethink how these SLAs will impact their bottom line, calling things into question like retention policies, onboarding speed, and who and where they might be hiring. So what we've seen is the shift from a metrics perspective of customers interested in understanding application level performance to customers now that are also interested in an opportunity to proactively identify the ability of a user's home network to support the operations that they're going to be doing day to day. In some cases, before the user is even hired. There's also other use cases where instead of focusing again on those more traditional metrics, now we talk about monitoring and measuring things like how often a user has an issue and how that impacts their ability to, maybe it's onboarding, onboarding within a reasonable amount of time or a similar amount of time based on the shift from remote to, from in-office to remote onboarding, as well as their ability to remain an employee if they're unable to keep their metrics up. So these are all concepts that have shifted because of this work from anywhere approach that really apply to this idea of SLA and how it's changed. The other thing that we hear a lot about is the idea of an SLA shifting from coverage of monitoring deployments. In the past, it was reasonable to say every office location, maybe if you only have 15 or 20 offices, that every office location gets every monitoring solution and everybody's happy. There's now this shift to, instead of 20 offices, I have 5,000 employees that need to be covered. what is the efficacy and efficiency of monitoring every single one of those versus maybe a subset, right? And how that feeds into the SLAs. So with that said, it's very important that the business be able to report on overall productivity and performance SLAs, whatever that means, in both the existing work from office world, but also in this new work from anywhere world. Now, one example of how AppNet is supporting this is via what we call our application quality reports and dashboards. And the goal of this dashboard is to provide executive level insight into performance SLAs aligned with the goal of ensuring the work from anywhere user is able to deliver effectively for the business. So when we talk about effective delivery, we can be talking about time being productive, uptime, time in a performance state when I'm not experiencing any issues or seeing degraded performance to the critical services and applications that I'm using day in and day out. And so with this application quality dashboard, we're able to quickly identify how well an application or service has performed against expected SLAs over time, as well as what locations are affected when issues arrive. So a little bit of a combination of both of the graphics that Alec had shown a few slides back, in addition to some additional higher level reporting. And this allows you to prove for whom and where SLAs have been violated when working with third-party app providers. And it also enables actionable reporting to IT and business leadership. Now, by leveraging customizable alert profiles, AppNeta can display a compliance summary that will allow you to rapidly identify adverse trends in performance for business critical applications and locations in order to make decisions, again, around staffing, things like security, using a VPN, using a CASB service, versus not, and productivity. Now, there is still the challenge of the additional environments that operate without predefined SLAs. So having detailed insight when looking at overall trends is a key required capability to ensure the efficacy of reporting like this. Remember, a lot of the environments that work from home supports do not have the same SLAs as work from office environments. We're not going to get an SLA from my Comcast home network as to what my service level is in terms of bandwidth available to me throughout the day. So the ability to filter down and highlight commonalities, things like ISP or geographic region, along with the ability to specify applications and services individually, are paramount in helping the business understand these new environments and ultimately make decisions that will both benefit the business and the end user. So now that we've covered the business level reporting, let's talk a little bit about how AppNeta can integrate with an existing tool set to help the IT staff keep track of the wider variety of incidents and environments they're now tasked with supporting. So when it comes to existing tool sets, AppNeta is able to integrate with these, both ticketing systems, BI platforms, data lakes, what have you, to allow for seamless aggregation of this new visibility and reporting for the IT team. The goal here is you're already adapting to enough. We don't want to force you to have your support teams have to learn a new technology or new system or add another monitor to the proverbial knock room in order to support this new data set. The other thing is we know that we're not the only solution you're using day to day. We certainly hope we're the primary tool, but we get that we don't solve every problem. And so we know that there's going to be other tools. But by aggregating data from AppNeta and these other services, you're going to get a much more holistic approach to understanding what's going on in the network. And being able to action on it is really the key. So our focus is on giving your teams the ability to solve problems versus learning and supporting another monitoring service in day one. Now, the ultimate goal here is the alerting to your operational tool set gives you a starting point, tells us where to start looking. The continuous monitoring and historically collected data gives you insight that you need to reduce mean time to resolve and find the source of the problem. And the dashboards within AppNeta will help close the loop on frequency and scope of impact by giving you a historical data set to compare against. Overall, AppNeta can give you an overtime historical representation of what you're seeing, i.e. daily issues from a problem user, more than just the anecdotal evidence, the full picture when it comes to supporting these network spaces. The final step is putting it all together to identify how each component drives towards enterprise success and scale. Whether it's the comprehensive API that companies can use to parse data in unique and useful ways directly, to directly embeddable graphics, to integration with Active Directory services and operational tool sets, along with security and compliance reports such as GDPR and SOC 2 Type 2, as well as even fully private deployment options for the most security-minded customers, Meta has the enterprise covered. For more information about our approach to security, check out our security and compliance page on our website.
Yep. And finally, to wrap up a little bit about the how, while some of what we talked about today is specific to work from home or cloud SaaS management, depending on the specific applications in use, there might be different data needed to find and fix end user problems. And so we have a bunch of that data. That's why Meta performs what we call 4-dimensional monitoring, which combines both an active and a passive monitoring methodology. So active monitoring for us measures application performance at layers 3 and 4 to ensure that underlying network is healthy. We also measure end user experience of the applications at layer 7 for things like web, API, voice, or video. And then we perform passive usage analysis with DPI and packet capture, all of which ensures that you have the right data to solve issues kind of when they do occur in a critical application for your business. With that, I'll pass it back to Paul.
All right, thank you very much, Alec. I appreciate it, Joe, as well. We got a few questions coming in. This first one is, can you share a work from anywhere war story or an example from your customers? So I guess what's some nightmares that you guys have encountered out in the field?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a war story, but it's always one that's kind of funny in my mind. Is we had a customer that was kind of early in the pandemic, went to work from home. They were doing troubleshooting with kind of all of their work from home employees that were having trouble, and these were kind of critical employees. They were customer facing, so they were on the phones all day, and bad performance on a Zoom meant they couldn't actually communicate with the customer. And they had gotten, I don't know if it was 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or an hour into troubleshooting when they just kind of got fed up and said, "Hey, can you just reset the router?" Or, let's try, kind of making some changes in the config of the Wi-Fi router and flip it. And the user basically said, "No, I can't do that." And they're like, "Oh, okay, why?" It turns out that user had been stealing Wi-Fi from their neighbor and didn't have access to the physical device. So that's the kind of stuff that we've been hearing and still occurs, but far less often nowadays.
Yikes.
Okay, I was like, Joe, anything from your world?
Yeah, I think maybe a more recent story that we've come across. Going back to one of the points that I made, where it relates to measuring productivity and the change to the SLA. We had a customer come to us with some challenges. BPO provider, so they're providing call center support for other large enterprise customers, and a number of newly hired agents in training were experiencing some issues where randomly during video calls or training sessions, they would just lose connectivity to the internet, and it would take them several minutes to get connected back, and it was slowing down the whole class. So we deployed Meta to monitor those agents, and what we ended up finding was that there were some issues with the VPN gateway that we were targeting, where effectively the customer used a number of load balanced VPN gateways, and depending on which one and what time of day you were connecting, we were able to identify that there was a large amount of traffic going to one or the other. So the load balancing wasn't equally distributing the load. And these users also happen to be operating out of more rural areas in the United States. So the internet capacity that's available to them is much lower than you might see in a central city location like Boston or New York. And so with that, what we were able to do is determine what time of day were we most often seeing these issues, correlate that back to the information we were getting from the VPN about utilized capacity on that network path. And when we saw these large spikes in utilization, we would equate that to when the user was being kicked off. So long story short, we were able to take that data. We made some changes to the way that the VPNs were load balanced between. Now the users are able to get stable, steady connections. And the nice thing about this is that within a lot of these large BPO type clients, if you're not able to be productive and perform the tasks to a certain level, there are decisions that have to be made, and sometimes those decisions result in termination. So we were able to save some people their livelihood and at the same time solve a problem that had been plaguing them for a while.
That's great, Joe. That just made me think of another example where large healthcare provider that was doing COVID test results basically through an application for basically an entire region. The app basically kept having problems where they basically crash. And the idea was, okay, so we can't submit COVID test results, which means we can't get responses. And so it became kind of obviously a top tier issue. What they ended up finding out is using experience monitoring, they basically identified one of the app servers that they were hosting. So instead of a load balancer, they basically had two kind of replicated app servers. And through experience testing, we're able to find that there was a cert issue on one of those machines. And so they fixed it within, a day or two, but they basically had this issue where all of a sudden, half the test results couldn't be submitted. And so obviously that can be a problem nowadays.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're about at time, guys. So I think this is probably a great place to wrap it. If you didn't get any of your questions answered, please feel free to reach out to one of us directly. If you'd like to learn more about AppMeta and gaining comprehensive visibility across your network, please visit www.appmeta.com/demo. All right. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks.